Remnants of a Forgotten Past by Alban 55, Chapter 3, Arcane. When Garo walked into the border town, he was instantly reminded of one of the civilian villages dotted around his home country. In other words, it was a filthy, lawless place untouched by the watchful eye of Suna, and the amount of good things about it could fit into a thimble. It reminded him of Suna too, but ever since he stopped going on murderous rampages, he wasn't supposed to be thinking those kinds of things, those kinds of thoughts. Who was going to know? The only thing missing was a rolling tumbleweed to signal his entrance into the grimy town. The town's main street was a dirt road which was small enough to see from end to end, with most of the buildings made of old wood in a specific style, with a few brick ones scattered here and there. The main street seemed to be mostly shops, bars/saloons, and a couple of shady motels with dubious signs that alluded to a special side business that went on behind the scenes, with the residential district of the dirt roads that led to the side streets and back alleys of the border town. It was midday, and the hot sun was beating down on the border town and baking the dirt roads. A few people were out and about despite this, but mostly were loitering on the porches of buildings or wherever they could find shade. Well, he was in civilization at least. His magical raccoon demon he played host to meant that he probably wasn't going to die in the sandy wasteland or by being attacked by a random street thug, but he needed food and water just like a normal human would. This town was unfamiliar, and his insomniac eyes panned over to a few strangers lounging lounging around on the porch of the nearest bar. There were a few things odd ever since he had arrived. Gar didn't sleep, and just a little while ago had awakened from some sort of unconscious state. He could worry about Shukaku eating away at his hand later, but the unconsciousness itself was peculiar. Second, he had awoken from underground in the desert. Being in the desert wasn't terribly surprising, given it was his homeland, but Tsunagakure was nowhere in sight. Third, he came across creatures he did not know existed. Fourth, this was not a town he was aware of. That didn't seem necessarily unusual. There were probably a few dozens in Kazunokune he couldn't name or place. Fifth, those strangers were wearing a style of dress that wasn't particularly typical in Suna or the Kazunokune at large. And the metal sign outside the settlement were written in characters that he didn't recognize. Garo's expression did change as he proceeded with this information, and the thin line that was his mouth did not quirk upwards or downwards as he came to the final conclusion. I am not in Suna or the Kazunokune anywhere, despite its similar terrain. Readjusting the gourd on his back, Gar came to a stop in front of the building and stepped onto the wooden porch while looking overhead. Those foreign characters loomed over him as the building signs, and Gar squinted in slight frustration. Then it came to him. General store, he pronounced with some difficulty. Reading the sign, though, led to a more troubling thought by the young Ichibi Jinchuriki. Why was he capable of reading that language? He had never seen it before, but upon looking at the script a second time, he could slowly feel himself getting a grasp over the characters, like an old memory that was becoming fresh again. Mind brimming with questions, Gara pushed open the double doors and went straight to the counter without even bothering to look at the display. When he heard the doors to his store open, the shopkeeper rushed to the counter. Welcome, welcome. If it's food you want, you browse all the shelves and aisles, especially special foods I keep in the back storeroom. So if you need something, ask, and I'll see if I have it back there. Gara paused. It was the same phenomenon that he was experiencing with the local writing words. He understood completely what the shopkeeper was saying to him, yet he recognized the words coming out of his mouth and could tell it was different than the spoken words of the elemental countries. The shopkeeper was a wiry man who looked to be in his 40s, wearing a white apron and with tidy black hair and a pencil mustache. His pleasant demeanor seemed somewhat forced. I'm here for information, actually, Gara said bluntly, not caring that the shopkeeper's expression turned sour. And there it was. He spoke back fluently in another language that he didn't remember learning. It was like a fluent bilingual. He recognized the words in his head as he spoke them, but could switch back to his native tongue in a heartbeat. That seemed to put a damper on the hot shopkeeper, and his expression turned into a sour frown. He twirled his mustache while giving the boy a dismissive once-over, eyeing his clothes and gourd with disdain. Oh, you are now? I don't suppose you would have any money on you, would you? I prefer information as well as goods, but like anything getting the information you want may come cost a bit of lien. I do not know what lien is, Gar replied deadly. That seemed to throw the shopkeeper for a loop. For what? He asked in confusion. You been living under a rock or something, kid? It ain't like we have different ones anymore. All four kingdoms are all united under one standardized currency. Gar didn't say anything, being at a loss of words. He was just as confused as the shopkeeper before him, but like the language, the terms that were being thrown around had the same effect of jogging an old memory. However, not having any answer seemed to make the shopkeeper angrier. I don't have time for stupid kids playing pranks. Cut the crap and get out of my store before I call the sheriff on you. Gar closed his eyes. His childhood would lend him experience dealing with irritated fools. Usually involves them meeting a bloody end, but he was resolved to not be that way anymore. Since he didn't want to deal with the man screaming in his face, he turned around and left the general store without another word. The shopkeeper gave him the evil eye until he was thoroughly out of the store, not just in appearance. The attitude of at least that one person was reminding him of how things used to be in Suna. Putting the shopkeeper out of his mind and prepared to try a new tactic, Gara headed to the biggest building he saw from his vantage point upon coming into the town. A white two-story building that appeared to be an inn of sorts was just a few doors down from the general store, and he was to try there next. And like everything else in the border town, it was a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Probably an inn for thieves and murderers on the run from the law. Edge towns like this were perfect for them. So, because it was full of villains, Garo strolled right up to the double doors and pushed them open like he owned the place. The interior was just like any old Western inn. Not that Garo would know about the Western theme. Instantly, he felt several pair of eyes on him. Once he entered, he walked up to the bar with about as much energy as Gar could possibly exude. Still, it seemed to be enough to insult the guests. Speaking of which, there was some sleazy drunken fool surrounded by bottles seated near the middle of the bar and forcing the bartender to babysit him. When Gara approached his own seat, he could already smell the booze wafting off of him in waves. The gray-haired man was rambling some drunken story back to the bartender, but Gara had already tuned him out. Show this job I'm on currently. Lazy bums on the lots of them. He slurred incoherently, all the while he was ogling the attractive yet rough innkeeper. She looked like she wanted nothing more than to hang him by the balcony, which no doubt wasn't helping when the drunk's eyes tried to subtly work their way to her exposed cleavage, the keyword being tried. I'll be with you in a minute, she told Gara, eyeing him suspiciously due to his apparent age. A cigarette hanging from her lips, her red curls wobbled as she smacked the man over the head, who gave a pained grunt in response. Behind the bar was a tally of hands broken, scratched into the wooden wall with a knife, probably by people who attempted to grope the innkeeper in any way, shape, or form. Stare at my rack one more time, and you'll find yourself sleeping on sand instead of one of my mattresses tonight, Crow. Then, without missing a beat, she turned to Gara and put on a much more cheerful expression, albeit one that was still fairly gruff. Now, what can I do for you, hun? She asked. Crow grunted and knocked over another bottle, swiveling his head over to stare stupidly at the kid with the gourd directed to his right. I'd like to know where I am, Gara said, getting straight to the point. Crow snorted in amusement and mockery. Why, you're in Zero Gordo, of course, she said patiently. The child before her was rather odd. Her eyes were drawn to the dark circles around his eyes and the strange gore on his back. What's wrong, kid? You lost? Did mommy and daddy leave their precious baby boy somewhere in town, and now he's trying to get back to them? If so, you've got some pretty shitty parents, kid. Crow began ribbing, and Gar almost rolled his eyes. If his father had merely been ignorantly negligent, then Gar would have awarded him Father of the Year. Not like it mattered if he got lost, since he could take care of himself. I'm sorry, that is insufficient. The name of the town I'm in can't really help me. Could you tell me the name of the country I am currently in? Gara said, his suspicion lending him to not reveal anything about the Kaze no Kuni, Hi no Kuni, etc. Crow gave a loud snort, his face nearly hitting the wood of the bar as the innkeeper looked at Gara with the same confusion that the shopkeeper had given him. This town is close to the border between Vakyo and Vale, but technically right now you would still be within the Kingdom of Vale. Vacuum and Vale. Those were two countries he had never heard of. Garo's mind was beginning to draw conclusions. Based on those suspicions he had, the strange snake monsters in the desert waking up in an unknown location, Lian as currency instead of real, and the existence of Vacuum and Vale, two countries that he had never heard of. In passing, Gara had heard of the multiverse theory, the butterfly effect, and all that. Alternate dimensions and the like were common in works of fiction, and there were even jutsu that could accomplish such a feat. It would certainly explain why the bizarre is happening, that he was transported into another dimension via a jutsu, but he was going to leave that for a worst-case scenario. It was still entirely possible that he was on a distant continent that had no contact with the elemental nations, and vice versa. How he got there out of the blue then was more of a mystery. I see. I'm afraid I am unaware of the names of Vacuum and Vale. Tell me, have you ever heard of a place called the Elemental Countries? Gara asked, drilling the bartender. Someone called the loony bin, and Crow snarked from next to him, giving a rude guffaw of laughter. He put his hand on the giant sword that was laying against the bar next to his seat, seemingly out of habit. The pretty innkeeper was a bit more hospitable, but even she looked like she had her doubts. I'm afraid not, sugar. You see, explorers have circumvented the globe centuries ago, and have set foot on all the land remnant has to offer. There are only 4 kingdoms in the world, Vacuoville, Atlas, and Mistral. Unless the elemental countries are some fancy pants slang to call one of the kingdoms, then they don't exist. Are you sure you're feeling okay, hon? The red-headed bartender asked. It's nothing, Gara said, the bartender's words pretty much putting his faraway continent theory to rest. He reacted in about as indifferent a way as one could in his circumstances. 4 kingdoms, a world called Remnant, apparently. Let's just put aside that for now. Whether or not you are aware of the elemental countries is irrelevant, but do you know any locations that would suffice as a hub of travel where I can attempt to travel back to my homeland? Well, in any case, I don't even know what you're doing so far out in the sticks, with no recollection of what you were doing, but the airships never come out to a place like this. There are airship ports set throughout the kingdoms, but the hub of travel is in Vale capital. If you're looking to travel to anywhere on Remnant, with the safest and fastest travel, I would head to Vale capital first. Hold it right there, sweetheart. Don't tell me you believe that crock of shit story. And Crow butted in. Listen, kid, I actually meant that you need to check into the nearest mental hospital. There ain't such a thing as the elemental countries. There's no way you're going to get back to them. I don't know why you think you come from there. Must have hit your head or something. That probably is true. Everything seems to indicate that I am in a completely alien land with no way back. Still, there are so many things I do not know about this remnant. I need a plan of action. If I'm stranded here, then I need a way to eke out an existence. However, I should also continue asking around about any connection to Suna or any of the other locations in the elemental countries, as well as a possible way to return to them. Heading to the capital city of this country should be beneficial in both those regards. And even then, I have to prepare for Suna's reaction in case there is a way back. I see. Thank you for your time. Gar bowed politely to the innkeeper, turning to leave, seemingly without a care in the world to the fact that he was parentless and lost. Hey, wait a minute. Aren't you going to stay? I mean, where are your parents? The innkeeper asked. Gar did nothing other than shake his head at the woman without turning around. His sand barrier popped up and stopped a bottle cap aimed directly at his head, followed by the red-headed innkeeper's cry of surprise. The man called Crow had flicked it right at him, and the metal bauble had gotten embedded in his sand barrier. Gar narrowed his eyes. There was not enough force behind that cap to seriously injure, but it was clear that it was thrown like that with deliberate and accurate motions rather than a clumsy toss. Huh? Crow grunted in confusion at seeing the wall of sand, raising an eyebrow at the sight of the stream of sand flowing from the gourd. Some of the other patrons made confused and concerned whispers at each other under their breath. One guy adjusted his cowboy hat below his eyes after making eye contact with Gara. Oh, my goodness me, the innkeeper shouted, throwing her well-manicured hands up in alarm. Some of the sand retracted into Gara's gourd, while the rest fell onto the floor as the shield dissipated. Now just hold up there, Prince of Darkness, Crow said, making a slant at what he thought was Gara's eyeliner. One thing Gara noticed about the man was that he seemingly threw out all the inhibitions he had while drunk. You're something else. To come into a seedy place like this, have no idea where you are or even what planet you're on, and keep your cool during the entire thing. You can't be more than 13 to top it all off, and that's sand. You're one weird kid. And did you stop me just to say that? Gar asked. Don't be so hard to get, sunshine. Mind if we scrap for a little bit? Crow asked, grabbing his blade from where he had left it. Gar would have rolled his eyes if that wasn't too much a display of emotion. Why? I don't have a reason to fight you. I'd prefer not to, in fact. Oh, come on. Don't be like that. I won't take no for an answer. Don't worry about it. I just want to judge your potential, Crow stated, dropping into a fighting stance. Garo sighed and stood rigid, popping the cork off of his gourd. The dramatic village of Hook looked like a tornado had swept through and leveled it in the wake of the Nevermore attack. Some of the tents were ripped to shreds, and most of the shacks and small houses that had existed had been bowled over. It was sort of like a moving image of human misery on display. But then again, so was life in the wilds. Some people were looking in disbelief at their ramshackle home that wasn't anymore, while others were just gathering around the village center and huddling together to comfort each other. The way the large man who was the village leader accompanying him looked upon the devastation, it didn't seem to be that rare of an occurrence, given the presence and sheer number of those grim, as they were called, would also seem to indicate that they were living in practically a nest of those things, making him wonder why they would choose this location to settle. Naruto stole a few glances at the larger man. He was dressed in some kind of robe that would be reminiscent of a monk's back in the Hinokuni. He had slicked back platinum blonde hair and had a bow similar to Flida's strapped to his hip. The two of them passed by another shack, and Naruto locked eyes with Flida's, who was sitting on a crate nursing the wound she had received from her battle. Most of the warriors had accepted him, but the dear woman just glared hotly back as they made eye contact. You guys aren't the most trusting, are you? The blond man sighed. I'm sorry about our previous behavior, and Flidace. We mistook you for something you're not, but the truth of the matter is that plenty of us here in the village owe you our lives. Don't let Flidace's attitude bring you down. She had a rough life being a faunus, making her one of the most untrusting of us, but she may have the biggest heart of anyone here. She'll warm up to you eventually. The man paused for a moment. Name's Archie, by the way. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto responded back, Archie cringing a bit. Strange name, kid. Doesn't seem like a name you would get growing up in the wilds of Mistral. You originally from Vacuo or something? He asked, to which Naruto had no clue what Vacuo was. They passed a ruined tent where a family was picking up debris. No, I don't even know what Vacuo is. Artesh stopped in confusion, to which Naruto bumped into his back. You don't know what Vacuo is? Damn it, kid, even in the wilds we know the name of the fourth kingdom that makes up Remnant. You've been living under a rock your whole life or something? The dark-skinned man asked. The word remnant and kingdoms caught Naruto's attention. Again, they were terms that Naruto didn't exactly know about, but they were mentions of them seemed to stir some foggy knowledge in him. I don't think so. I'm from Konoha in the Hinokuni of the Elemental Countries. I don't even know why I'm here. Archie stopped in front of his shack, sitting down on a crate resting right next to the front door and rubbing a hand through his cornrows. Naruto, are you sure you haven't spent too much time out in the wild? Naruto wanted to say anything. His mouth flapped up and down as he tried to come to an explanation to his sudden appearance far away from home. Archie's gaze on him was slightly intense, and the two stood in awkward silence for a moment before it was thankfully broken. The smallish figure was moving around with the shack they were mingling by, and the door creaked open slowly. Father, is it okay to come out now? A small, scared voice proclaimed. Even if she hadn't proclaimed Archie as her father, the skinny yet lanky girl who came out was the dead ringer in the family resemblance department. Most notable was the same dark skin tone and shock of blonde hair that resembled a lion's mane. She was even dressed in the same monk-style clothing as her father. Ah, Arslan, I'm glad to see you're safe. Archie smiled wider than Naruto had seen him do up to this point. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, nodded resolutely before her gaze turned to him. Who is this, father? She asked. This is Naruto. He's a stranger to these lands. Was just passing through town. Turns out we were pretty jerkish to him before he went and saved our asses from the Nevermore. Arslan's eyes lit up. You're the one who defeated that bird. And she asked before her golden eyes panned around the ruined village. She then bowed at the boy respectfully. Thank you for saving our humble village, she said. It was nothing, Naruto said, blushing lightly and rubbing the back of his head. Naruto here said he was from, what did you call the place again? Archie butted in, placing a hand on Naruto and Arslan's shoulder. The Elemental Countries. Yeah, the Elemental Countries. Never heard of it myself. The elemental countries, Aslan said whimperously. So you're away from home on your own? Don't you have anything family? She asked, only to squeak when she heard her father growl. Arslan, Artsir said slowly. In the wilds, everyone's affair are their own business. You know Flidis doesn't like it when people ask about her past. Arslan looked away, slightly ashamed. I want to get back, though, Naruto whispered, though both Arslan and Artish heard him speak. The father and daughter pair stared at each other uncomfortably. Well, do you know where it is? Arslan asked. He doesn't even know what Bacchio and Mistral is, and we've never heard of the elemental countries. I think we're in a bad spot, Artsir said. Well, we should help him out. Try to help Naruto find his home, Arslan implored her father and village leader. Artsir sighed. Arslan, you know we already have enough on our plate as it is. He's welcome to stay and travel with us, but we go wherever it gives us the best chance to survive. Not to mention, we've already had plenty of close calls with the Clover Troop. We don't have time to chase a ghost, or in this case, a village that we've never even heard of and don't know where it is. Naruto and Arslan both hung their heads. Naruto in particular was looking very uncomfortable, and clearly for reasons related to his current situation. Oh yeah, Naruto said, changing the subject. What's this Clover Troop I've heard about? Both Archie and Arslan's face darkened simultaneously. Those guys. Archie growled loudly, his face twisted in anger. Out of all the shit I've seen out here in the wilds, I could have never imagined that humans could be bigger monsters than the monsters themselves. Yeah, the son of a bitch that runs it may want to call it a circus, but anyone with half a brain would call it a slave ring under the guise of a circus or carnival. A carnival? How could anyone set up a carnival in a place like this? Naruto asked in astonishment. Well, to be more accurate, they're traveling circus that more often than not moves throughout the wilds of Mistral. Sometimes, though, they head inside the kingdom's walls, but they'd never get away with what they do if they tried it there. Grim are an essential part of their act, but they also use Grim and their employees for more shady purposes. Besides the Grim, our camp was attacked by the Clover Troop just over a week ago. That's why we were so wary of you. We mistook you for Clover. Naruto grimaced, his fist falling to his side as he clenched both. I don't understand. Why go after you guys? I think you might be able to guess already. The Clover Troop wanted fondness for their acts, so they attacked our village with their captured Grim and captured as many fondness that they found suitable. It's the only way they can get personnel for their acts. They can't go after settlements in the kingdom under the watchful eye of Mistral government. They came out here and captured fondness from the wilds. Not remembered the word fondness being thrown around by the villagers. In a sixth sense, he guessed that the Clover Troop were after people with those animal traits like Felides. In the elemental countries, people like that would have no doubt be more than capable of serving as a sideshow. Unconsciously, Naruto's hand brushed up against his cheek, and he stroked his whisker marks. He wasn't one of these fondness, but this reminded him too much of home, being shunned and mocked for being different than a normal human. Arslan and Ashtir stared at him, and the large man put a reassuring hand on Naruto's shoulder. His eyes were drawn to the strange whisker marks on his face. Could Naruto be a fondness? That would explain his reaction, but Archie had only ever seen fondness traits represented through tails and ears, never anything like what Naruto had. Still, it wasn't his or his daughter's place to determine his species. What do you guys think you're going to do about the Clover Troop? I mean, from what you're saying, they could strike again, right? Naruto asked. Archie grunted. Yeah, they might be back. Our warriors hit him where it hurts, and they didn't make off with as many fondness. The Ringmaster is a foul-tempered oldest league bag. He's sure to take it personally. Naruto looked over the village. It was a sorry state, apparently not just from grim attacks, but from fellow humans as well. Alright, I'll help fight them off if they come back. I want to stay with you guys for a while, Naruto said. He would have to learn as much as he could about this new place. Getting home would have to wait for just a little while. There was a new enemy to fight, but the thought of Jiraiya crossed his mind. His sensei was probably worried sick right now, maybe even to the point of returning to Konoha for aid. There were just so many affairs back home he had to get back to, but he couldn't just leave this place, leave these people to get picked off by a deranged circus. Naruto stuck out his hand to Arshtir and smiled his megawatt grin. Let me fight with you guys against these assholes. The Clover Troop was infamous in Mistral, not just in the wilds but in the kingdom proper itself. The traveling circus of performers had a tagline as they traveled throughout the continent. Come on in all to see unbelievable and death-defying acts of bravery. Find yourself amazed and mystified by the unusual and wonderful inhuman marvels here to perform for your entertainment. The ringleader of the Clover Troop was a man named Otto von Clava. At first glance, he would seem like your basic campy circus ringmaster, garbed in a garish green suit, in marching bow tie and top hat. And Claver was a man who was always very personable with guests. Every time his traveling circus rolled into town, during shows he would exude an aura of exuberance and energy for a man of his age. And after the show, he would wave through the jubilant crowd with a bounce in his step and twirling his cane, and usually humming a ditty, as he always had time for the fans. Otto von Claver also had ties to the minstrel nobility and ordered the capture and enslavement of faunas from the wilds outside the kingdom. Said captured faunas were of course meant to perform in the troop's acts. Feline faunas were the best acrobats you could dream of, jumping through flaming rings and walking on tight ropes as if they were nothing. Claws were made up of other assorted faunas, and clowns were made up of other assorted faunas, and the ones that were based on the very rare animal species or had unique traits were kept as circus freaks. The Clover Troop even kept Grim, taming them as best they could for their act. Surely such a thing would be illegal, right? It didn't follow the safety guidelines for an industry like the circus. Well, the Clover Troop didn't follow any safety guidelines to speak of out in the wilds. In fact, one of the main attractions was to see a beowulf chase some poor sap down. Turnover rates in employments was high, but it wasn't like the Clover Troop could go recruiting with the walls of Minstrel. Claver scowled at his desk, taking out an abacus and doing some math. That podunk little village in the wilds was stronger than it looked. They had only captured 2 humans and 6 faunas to become circus acts, and they had incurred losses in some of his human resources. Should have used more Grim to subdue that stupid village completely. They had too many warriors, Claver said, taking off his top hat and running a hand through his gray hair. He reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of maps from within. Based on the movements of the nomadic villages, a trip to any of the other ones would waste a lot of time and resources. Plus, I need to send a message to these parts that the Clover Troop is not to be trifled with. Claver gave a crooked smile of perfect white teeth, sticking a thumbtack into the dot on the map labeled Catalihork, and twisted it in forcefully for good measure. I think it's time we take another visit to Catalihork. End of chapter 3.